Hey, welcome to the first episode of I'm in the Band, a podcast hosted by me, Allison Wolf.
I can see what you're going to say to me if I don't explain it away. I'm in the band and I deserve to be here and I do anyway.
Each episode, I'll be talking with a different punk musician or artist, door-kicking, ceiling-smashing people who've made their art their way. So on that note, let's get to our first guest, Donita Sparks. She sings and plays guitar in the iconic all-girl rock band L7.
She wakes up wet in a shower stall.
L7 busted into the 90s grunge scene and laid waste to ladylike expectations of women in music. They helped start the abortion rights group Rock for Choice and confronted sexism with humor and irreverence. L7 was a huge influence on me, Riot Girls, and other 90s punk women. I put their anthem Shove on every mixtape I made. And I'll never forget the time Donita threw her used tampon out to the audience at a festival. Not gonna lie, she inspired me to throw a few bloody projectiles of my own. When we met up recently, we talked about her rebellious youth, L7 reuniting, and their new documentary, Pretend We're Dead. I started by asking her how it all began.
Well, I'm the youngest of four girls, and my mom was a feminist. My parents were both liberal Unitarians, and strangely, we lived in a very conservative Republican neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. So we were already kind of a strange family for the neighborhood.
So do you think that as the youngest child, as the baby, did that have anything to do with any rebelliousness or maybe just independence or anything like that? Or
I think independence for sure, and I think I got away with murder compared to my sisters. My parents were just not really paying attention. It's not that they didn't love me. They were just like, oh, she's got this, and little did they know that I was, going to clubs at 16 and stuff like that. We lived on the south side of Chicago, and I would drive all the way up to the north side of Chicago to go to clubs and see bands, go dancing.
can you remember any kind of early acts of rebellion? Could be music related or not.
I will tell you a story of rebellion. I went to a public school, but for some reason we had this very peculiar principal who would not allow girls to wear pants to school. And I'm not talking about jeans or anything. I'm talking about like Marsha Brady pantsuits. So I organized my friends to all wear pantsuits on the day that he would be in the classroom handing out the report cards. So it would be in his face, and it actually worked. And surprisingly, there were a couple girls who were completely against this. And I think that was my first experience of like, oh my God, these girls don't want to be liberated. How friggin' weird is that?
You were a mini feminist.
I was, indeed.
So as far as like maybe your first time playing guitar and stuff like that, how or when did that happen? Or did that happen while you were still in Chicago or later?
It did. My sister came home from college and she had a guitar. And she was playing without an amplifier, but just playing scales. And I was watching her hand, and I was probably stoned. And I just thought her hand looked so cool. And I was like, wow, my sister's like playing guitar. And it was so mind-blowing and such a revolution. It was like, oh my God, like she's actually like this thing that I watch people do, she's actually like doing it. And so I asked my mom for a guitar for my 16th birthday. And so I got a shitty electric guitar and started taking lessons.
And did you start any bands or anything like that when you were still in Chicago, or did you wait till you moved to LA?
I started a band for the for my high school talent show, just as a weird thing to do. And we did Surfin' USA by the Beach Boys. And I was playing guitar. My friend Esther was playing bass. And we both dropped acid before the performance. And we had two friends, one on tambourine, one on bongos, who were terrible. We came out on skateboards, none of us knowing how to skateboard. And we just we were on acid. And I looked at my friend Esther, and her hands were in a completely different place of like where they were supposed to be. And I was like, oh my God, like what the hell does this sound like? And so we got an E for effort on that one, and we looked fabulous, but we must have been god awful.
That's awesome. What was it that got you to want to leave Chicago or leave town and then brought you to LA? Is LA the first place you moved after Chicago?
LA is the first place I moved. I graduated from high school and I worked for about a year being a foot messenger downtown Chicago, and saved enough money to move out here. And I kind of thought I'd be out at the beach because I wanted to be a surfer because I love the music, and how cool would it be to get into beach culture? You know, I was still thinking it was like the 1960s out here.
So what was it like when you first got here in the reality? And what was like your first day or week or month like in LA?
It was just very sleazy and very sketchy. And I was very green in the sense if someone said hi to me on the street, I'd say hi back, and then they'd follow me for like blocks and blocks. Just creepy, skeevy people, you know? And in Hollywood, on every corner at that time, there were like porn newspapers. On every corner. Like you couldn't escape pornography. And it was so prevalent and weird. It was like, oh, wow, this town is really sleazy, gross, and also complete magic.
And then at some point you were in Silver Lake or part of the kind of Silver Lake arts scene.
Yeah, I had a boyfriend who worked at the LA Weekly as he was in charge of the messengers, delivering papers and such. And he said, do you want to use my car and be a messenger? And I said, yeah. And then the art department liked me because I was such a star. And they asked me if I wanted to work in the art department. So I got into the art scene, the music scene, and it was really cool having that scene as an anchor for me. And I moved from Hollywood to Echo Park. That's where all the writers and everything lived for the LA Weekly.
How did that kind of being involved in that scene and kind of arts and writing scene and stuff like that lead to starting L7 or being in bands?
The art department at the LA Weekly had a pretty shitty band, and we just did it for fun. And my current bandmate, Susie Gardner, had also worked in the art department, but she had been fired like a year or two before I worked there. So, you know, friends were like, you should meet Susie, she plays guitar, and you should meet Donita, she plays guitar. And so that's how we came together through that scene of artists. And so we decided to start a band, which was fueled by amphetamines and alcohol at first. And it was really fun and really horrible because we couldn't get anybody to play with us. So it was a constant like shit show of rehearsals, you know, where maybe the drummer would show up, maybe they would, you know.
Why wouldn't people stick around or play with you? Was it a flakiness of LA?
Number one, we weren't playing the kind of music that was trendy at that time. We were sort of playing this mashup of hard 70s rock with kind of garagey or catchy 60s rock, but, you know, kind of heavy, distorted stuff. And so that just was not in vogue at the time, playing heavy in distortion, distorted guitars and stuff like that. So the only people who played that kind of music were like dunderhead dudes. And so we'd have to be relying on like these dunderhead dudes to not call us cunts every other rehearsal, you know, and like, or get drunk and like just act like assholes. I remember we had to fire one drummer because he was drunkenly furious that we were booked into a gay club. And so we just put his drums out on the street. Like, you know, okay, fine, you don't want to show up to the gig? Your shit's going out on Santa Monica Boulevard.
As far as with L7, how did you name the band? I don't know if you guys were even called that in the beginning.
Well, we were naming the band, and I refused to have any gender reference in our band name because I really wanted to sound like you couldn't tell what sex we were. Because so many so many bands with women in them at the time in Los Angeles were like the blah, blah, blah girls or the Pussycats or whatever. It just was very much like, oh, they're chicks who play. They must be girls, like with a Z. And we were very much not that. We weren't really working that. So that was, we had some horrible names on our list, and I'm not even going to tell you what they were. But the only one that we could agree upon, I was like, well, how about L7? I mean, it's an old term for a square, and it was like, okay, you too, L7. Okay, L7.
And so it sounds like you guys had a Spinal Tap kind of thing going on with the drummer situation.
Yes.
How did you end up with Dee Placus and she didn't die off or spontaneously combust?
Well, it was so difficult to find drummers, period, male or female, who would play with us because, the dudes didn't want to play with chicks and in the rock scene. And we met Dee through a mutual friend she was playing in a band as a drummer. And she came and tried out, and she was amazing. And she was perfect.
And then what about Jennifer? How did she come into the band?
Jennifer Finch was coming to our shows. We were playing shows, even though we were going through all these lineup changes. And she would come to our shows, and she was like, I want to play bass. And I'm like, well, do you play bass? She's like, no. And I'm like, well, you got to play bass. She was just kind of a challenging sort of brat, but she worked out. And she was a fabulous show woman, too. So that helped elevate our game as a live band,
Yeah, I bet it was really exciting what you guys were doing and just kind of like, especially like your showmanship and everything, the showwomanship.
Like before Sub Pop came along and like the photographs of Charles Peterson kind of showed audiences how to behave for bands, a lot of people just like would stare at us, just kind of, I don't know. I think we were kind of this weird freak show or something like, oh, they're chicks, but they're not doing the sex angle and they're playing hard rock. Like, what is this? It was kind of, a little odd, but cool,
So with Shove, I guess it started with that as a single, right? It's like,
yeah.
Yeah. That was on every mixtape I ever made.
Oh, I love that. That's so,
So
great.
great.
Getting on Sub Pop really kind of saved us as a band because Shove became like a little underground hit. And we were known nationally then in like, through magazines like Flipside and Maximum Rock and Roll. The fanzines were very strong at that time. I mean, you'd go on tour and there would be a Flipside in every punk rocker's bathroom. So it was a really exciting time. Like if you got on a label like Sub Pop or you got written about in Flipside, that was like huge.
So it enabled you to tour a lot. And I think, right? Mm-hmm. And then from there, what was the scene or the situation in your touring then? Like, where were you touring? And was it, a punk rock house party type thing? Or were you like sleeping on floors? And then how did things kind of progress from there?
At first, we were just in a van, just the four of us. And we stayed on people's floors all the time. I remember right before we went to Europe, when we got signed to a major, we left our sleeping bags in our friend's van. We had been using his van for a couple of years, and we just never retrieved our sleeping bags. That was it. And then those sleeping bags were used by another band who was renting his van. So it's kind of like the symbolic leaving behind of the sleeping bags was like a big deal.
I was really, really surprised to see that you guys had all this home video footage and stuff like that, which I think that people don't understand nowadays was really rare at the time in the early 90s.
Yeah.
But also how it really reveals the camaraderie that you guys had amongst each other and sort of how this band came out of friendships, and there was just lots of fun and behind the scenes dorkiness and what I think is like the teen girl bedroom on acid kind of feeling.
Yeah, well, I think it was Jennifer's idea to get the video camera, and we all chipped in for it out of some gig money. It was $1,000, which was a huge amount at the time. And we lost our first one because Dee left it in the overhead compartment on a plane. She got a little tipsy on the plane and forgot that she was in charge of the video camera and left it never to be seen again, with like some of our earliest tapes in the bag. But but yeah, we all took turns filming each other, and we had a lot of fun on the road. And I can't say, here's the thing about L7. We aren't tight friends. We never were tight friends. What brought us together was the music, and we're very different people, even though I think our humor brings us together, and our punk aesthetic brings us together.
Yeah, I always saw everyone as a super strong personality and like in and of its own, and
Yeah.
really different from each other in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like a force. Like, it's the sum of its parts, L7.
I think for sure, because I've had a solo band, and when I walked out, I didn't feel invincible with my solo band, but when I walk out with L7, I feel fucking invincible. It's this force field, and it's everybody's taking the heat or everybody's taking the applause, and it's a very powerful feeling that there's a unity of a group.
One thing that is a big deal was Rock for Choice. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what Rock for Choice was, because, we all knew back in the 90s, but I think these days people might not know. But how important that was, and what a big statement it was as a band for you guys to start that and have these concerts. And
I had done a couple very small concerts with my previous band called Rock Against Coat Hangers, which I knew we couldn't keep that name. But so we started Rock for Choice with the Feminist Majority Foundation. And we just all felt that protest music and protest rallies were really kind of dreary musically. And unfortunately, they would hit up the same artists, Bonnie Raitt and Jackson Browne and, Joan Baez. And, they were the go-to protest artists. And we were like, well, shit, we know a lot of bands in the underground and bands that are really getting hot right now. So why don't we start our own pro-choice benefit series? And Nirvana was on board from the get-go. So that was our first concert.
And then I guess some of that kind of died down after a while. Was it just that you needed to focus more on the music?
We were still focused on the music, but the press obsession with it, and granted, it was an interesting hook for a story or a little blurb for a story, but we were constantly being asked about abortion rights, and then your politics comes under the microscope, and so we were becoming like these too much the face of the organization.
Yeah, no, I get it. When I think of L7, the adjective irreverent comes to mind. And I just want to think of some different instances that are maybe famous, where you've thrown the tampon at Reading, and I'm also thinking about dropping your pants in the live show, The Word, in the UK and stuff like that. Can you talk about some of those things and sort of what your intentions were, or maybe weren't at the time when those things happened, or just in the way you live your life in general?
Well, I think it's really fun to shock people, especially squares, but also there's sort of a method to our madness, I think, with L7. I think a lot of people just think we're like these pants dropping like lunatics or something, but there's a method to the madness, and there's always, even in the documentary, like there's a little bit of explanation as to maybe what was going as far as the context for throwing the tampon. We were pelted with mud the entire set, and it was very demoralizing, and I was also getting pissed off, and I was also going with the absurdity angle because I like absurdity. I'm also from a performance art background. I was doing performance art when the band started as well. And it's just to amuse myself or ourselves in the band.
Well, do you think it's also because it's about like women's bodies and menstruation that it kind of was more shocking than it almost should have been, maybe, to the media or the mainstream? Because I read a lot of people's reactions like, it was so unsanitary. And
it's pretty shocking. I'll say it. It's like I feel it has yet to be topped. I mean, with maybe the exception of Gigi Allen throwing his shit into the audience, but I don't know what was quite behind that. But for a while, I was really kind of not into the fact that I did that because I was like, whoa, that was really hardcore. But now these young feminists just like love it, and they're throwing tampons at us on stage, like not used ones. They're throwing, with love letters written on them in Sharpie, like, we love you, throwing tampons at us. And so it's just really, somebody made like a meme, like one of those, it's me throwing the tampon and it says role model. And it's like, wow, that's wild.
It directly influenced me. I totally threw a tampon at a show. Like,
did you?
A year later.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, yeah. It was at a Fugazi show.
Oh, my God.
Ian thinks I was throwing the tampon at him. Ian Mackay thought so. But I was trying to throw it over his head into their audience because their audience had been like shoving girls around in the front.
Oh, God.
So, but yeah, he still thinks I tried to throw it at him. And and I totally got that from you. And then actually my band Party Line years later, it was after the second Bush selection, and we were really angry, and it was right after Halloween. We had all this fake blood remaining from Halloween. So we bought a whole bunch of dollar store maxi pads and filled them all with blood and threw those out.
Nice.
So that was sanitary, but...
That was those were sanitary napkins, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But guys were freaked out and going all over town saying like, oh my God, they threw out used maxi pads. There were 40 of them filled with fake blood.
Hilarious.
Like, do they really think? And it was
I
bright
think
red.
you should keep that rumor going.
You're right.
They were indeed used by all of you guys and saved up for a couple months.
Years.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got that from you.
My mother would be so proud. Not really.
And also in the film, you talk about going to Brazil and having police escorts there. Mm-hmm. And then also there was something that happened in Japan with a kind of almost a Fabulous Stains kind of copying of something that you guys did.
Oh, we wore, in Japan, they wear like surgical masks if they're sick. So we wore those in a photo shoot. And then the next show in Japan, first couple rows all had the sick masks on. So it was just this weird visual of like all these kids rocking out in these sick masks, Brazil was insane. It was the largest crowds we've ever played to, and we had no idea how we'd be received there. And we were hearing weird stories like chick bands were getting spit on and all this stuff, and we just heard like, oh God, they're gonna be Neanderfucks down there. Like, we have no idea. Like they're gonna be these like, macho dudes down there or something, and it was just insane. And they were dropping their pants. Like the footage, it's so funny because the big cliche is chicks showing their tits to bands, to the boys, And with us, they were all dropping their pants, like on each other's shoulders, like dropping their pants, showing us their penises. It was wild. It was like, oh my God. They were gender playing too, It was really great. And I remember the dudes in the wings, like the Chili Peppers were in the wings and Fugazi was in the, just watching. And they were like, wow, this is new.
What kinds of discrimination or challenges did you face, whether that be coming from the media or from promoters? And that could be as far as being women and how are you treated or anything like that.
We, I think, suffered discrimination from the suits and from the powers of the music industry. Most of the bands on the scene were incredibly supportive. It was the squares with the power in the music industry that I think were very threatened by us. I think that they didn't know what to do with us. It was just like, what are these fucking freaky, fugly chicks? Like, who are these, like, these gals, And Lollapalooza, we were not asked, even though Anthony from the Chili Peppers was requesting us to be on Lollapalooza, and they said no. So the next year, we wrote the organizers of Lollapalooza a fax that said, who does L7 have to blow to serve Coors at Lollapalooza? And we signed it, L, always the bridesmaids, never the brides, 7. And we got on the fucking bill.
That's awesome. And so I wanted to ask, how did things start falling apart with L7?
Well, Jennifer left the band in like 95 or something. And she wanted to do other things. And we kept going. And our popularity was dropping. Grunge was dying. And you know, it's hard to make it, and it's hard to sustain it. The press is moving on to the next thing, you know. It's like Beck is big, or you know, Green Day's big, or they just move on, and you've got to be, if you're a band that can keep that level going, it's amazing, because it's hard to do. And then eventually we got dropped, and we kept going and made another record on our own. And then there was no money. There was just no money, and it just fell apart, you know.
And you had bandmates who were quitting by like leaving a note or a phone call or something.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you're married to somebody, it's much easier to just leave a fucking letter, right? Or like, do you really want to sit down with them and say, "Darling, we're not darlings anymore"? Like, that's kind of what happened. Like, honestly, like, it doesn't really go into that in the documentary, but we weren't crazy about each other after the breakup of the band. So, and we didn't talk to each other for, 15 years. You know, not on hateful terms, but like just not on friendly terms, you know.
So then what was it that kind of ended up getting you to start thinking about playing together again? I remember mutual friends of ours and stuff being like, oh, they'll never get back together. Oh, Donita would never do it.
I know, isn't that funny? I thought it would never happen. It just, I don't know. Somebody, our booking agent had said, hey, I'm getting offers. Would you guys consider? And I was like, oh, no fucking way. We haven't talked to each other. Like, I'm not calling them. I'm not, like, they're not calling me. Like, and then I started to think about it, and I was like, well, we started to be interviewed separately for the documentary. So we were all kind of just talking about things, and I think everybody's got their own story, and it's much different than everybody else's in their memories of things. And we definitely did not do an autopsy of the band. We did not read the coroner's report of the band, because if we had done that, I think it just would have led to those shitty feelings coming up again. And we just wanted to kind of water under the bridge it and just move on. And we ended up having a lot of fun, which is like the coolest thing. So, it's weird too, because since our reunion and Trump getting into office, we've got fans like just kind of grasping onto our arms, like, save us, like there's such desperation for a band that will say something, to be a threat, and to be challenging in this challenging time.
Well, there must be a reason that they're looking to L7. I mean, there must be a spirit that they're hearkening back to, and that they want, and that they're thirsty for, that, and maybe avoid somewhat in current pop or punk culture.
Well, I think that the grunge era's, in my opinion, greatest legacy is how many women were playing in bands, and how many of those women and those female bands were not compromising. And I think that is strongly needed today. And that's what I hear from a lot of young people, male and female, is that those sort of role models are a bit non-existent at this time for them. So I think that we can all be proud of that era. You know what I mean? Like, it was inspiring to a lot of young people.
Donita Sparks, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Allison.
I can see what you're going to say to me, if I don't explain it away.
I'm in the Band is brought to you by TIDAL On Air and is produced by me, Allison Wolf.
And me, Jonathan Shiflett.
You can find our podcast by going to tidal.com/us/onair or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at RealBabyDonut. Bye.
Listen to